What would you do if you returned to a village after 30 years and found the same children waiting at the gate, unchanged, unaged, still 12 years old? What if their faces pressed against the windows at night, pale and unblinking, as though time itself had abandoned them? And what if whispers rose from the houses, all in the same fragile voices, repeating the same words over and over? We are not meant to grow. Welcome to Classified Ledger. Tonight, we follow one of the most disturbing mysteries ever whispered about a forgotten English valley, Ashwood Hollow. This is not a tale of graves, nor of ruins, but of children who remained as they were, while the world around them aged and decayed. Before we begin, write down in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is right now. I always find it fascinating to know who joins us and when. And if you are drawn to unsettling histories and the macabre silence of forgotten places, please subscribe to the channel and press like so that our investigations may continue. In the coming chapters, we will walk through cottages left with meals unfinished, voices that echoed without bodies, and cellars where secrets were hidden beneath the boards. Each step brings us closer to the unnerving question: what were the children of Ashwood Hollow, and why did they never change? Some mysteries are buried in the earth, others, like this one, are preserved in silence, lingering, waiting, and refusing to pass into history. In the Parish census of 1832, the hamlet of Ashwood Hollow appeared as little more than a footnote, an outlying cluster of cottages obscured by fog and woodland, where the road narrowed into ruts and vanished beneath the pines. The ledger lists a total of 41 inhabitants. Among them, 12 are marked as children, their ages ranging between 8 and 12. Their names, repeated in the careful ink of the census taker, belong to families bound together by marriage, each surname appearing twice, sometimes thrice, as if the valley permitted no new lineage to enter. When the census was revisited in 1860, the anomaly emerged. The same 12 names appeared again, in the same sequence, their recorded ages unaltered. The children had not advanced a year. They were not replaced by younger offspring, nor erased by burial. Their presence had simply endured, unchanged, as if time itself had faltered at the edge of the hollow. No notation in the official record acknowledges this discrepancy. Only a faint line in the margin, "No change since last," suggests the census taker recognized the impossible. Ashwood Hollow sat in a depression of land where fog rarely lifted. Even in midsummer, the air carried a damp heaviness, muffling sound and obscuring distance. The woods surrounding the hamlet formed a natural wall, with only a single cart path tracing its way to the nearest parish town. Few travelers passed through, and fewer still remained. Accounts from neighboring villages spoke of Ashwood Hollow as a place where the sun seldom reached the soil, where smoke from hearths curled slowly and seemed to linger unnaturally against the treetops. In parish documents, the children of Ashwood Hollow were noted with precision, but never with comment. Baptismal rolls list them, school rosters repeat their names, yet nowhere do the records remark upon the absence of growth. It is only when the records are read sequentially, 1832, 1841, 1851, 1860, that the dissonance becomes impossible to ignore. 12 children, unaged across 3 decades, remained inscribed in ink as though they had been pressed permanently into the valley's stillness. Silence permeated not only the records but the recollections of those who lived nearby. A clerk in the diocesan office remarked that inquiries about Ashwood Hollow were rarely answered with detail. Villagers who knew of it spoke softly, and often only in passing, as though the place were best left undescribed. The census, in its clinical arithmetic, had preserved what rumor would not: the persistence of children who neither matured nor disappeared, occupying the parish rolls as fixtures rather than lives. The anomaly was buried in the margins of history, an administrative note that would have been forgotten had the ledgers not survived. Ashwood Hollow was not a site of industry or pilgrimage, not a battlefield or estate. It existed in silence, and within that silence 12 children remained suspended, unchanging, unacknowledged, and inexplicably still. The census sought only to measure presence, but what it recorded was a fracture in time itself. To understand Ashwood Hollow, one must begin not with its landscape, but with its names. The parish marriage ledgers, preserved in damp ink and brittle paper, repeat themselves with a rhythm both monotonous and alarming. Across the first half of the 19th century, only 3 surnames appear with regularity: Harrow, Crowthorne, and Bellamy. Together, they formed the entirety of the valley's bloodline, weaving through one another in patterns that would, in any other place, have been regarded with suspicion. The ledgers document the collapse of choice. By 1838, cousin married cousin as a matter of inevitability. By 1849, unions joined uncle to niece, aunt to nephew, brother's child to sister's child. Such entries were recorded without comment, the officiating clergyman noting only the vows, the date, and the witnesses, often the same individuals who reappeared generation after generation, their signatures varying little except in the slow tremor of age. The scarcity of surnames made the ledgers read less like Reggie, isters of marriage, than like the folding of a single name upon itself, tightening year by year. There is no evidence of outsiders entering the record, no new blood, no unfamiliar family traced into the hollow. Travelers may have passed through, but none married, none settled. The road leading into the valley was poor, choked with roots and prone to washouts, a deterrent to trade and a safeguard for secrecy. The hollow's marriages, then, became a cycle without release, the same three families binding themselves together until their distinctions blurred. Genealogical reconstruction reveals the depth of entrapment. A child born in 1842 could claim no fewer than 6 overlapping kinships within 2 generations, father and cousin, mother and niece, uncle and grandfather converging into roles that the language of lineage struggles to articulate. In the marginalia of one surviving family chart, an unknown hand scrawled the word confined, as though to summarize both the social and biological reality of the hollow. The atmosphere of suffocation extended beyond paper. Observers noted that Ashwood Hollow kept itself apart from surrounding villages, seldom attending markets or fairs. Witnesses from neighboring parishes recalled the hollow's children walking together in clusters, pale and reserved, never mingling beyond their group. Even at church festivals they sat apart, speaking little, their surnames binding them more tightly than their hymns. By the middle of the century, the parish registry no longer resembled the branching tree of ordinary genealogy, but rather a tightening coil. Each union narrowed possibility. Each birth was less a new branch than another twist of the same thread. In such confinement, identity itself became fragile. Children bore the features of multiple roles, nephew and half-brother, cousin and son, distinctions collapsing into sameness. The hollow had achieved what most communities avoid at all costs, bloodlines folding inward until they became a chamber of echoes, each new generation a reflection of the one before. In genealogical terms, Ashwood Hollow ceased to expand. It did not mingle, it did not disperse. It closed upon itself, and in that closure bred both the mystery of the children who never grew and the silence that surrounded them. The hollow's strangeness lay not only in its genealogical confinement, but in the unsettling permanence of its children. Parish school registers tell the story most clearly. Names first entered in 1834, Elias Harrow, Clara Bellamy, Thomas Crowthorne, and 9 others, remained written across the decades without alteration. Teachers noted attendance faithfully, marking present beside each child year after year. Yet the columns that should have shown growth in years remained still, as though the pupils were exempt from the ordinary passage of time. Marginal notes betray the unease of the instructors. In 1843, one teacher added the phrase, "no change in stature." Another, a decade later, remarked, "faces as first seen." These were not the remarks of fanciful men, but of instructors tasked with recording progress, measuring letters learned, lessons recited, and sums memorized. Progress was expected, but the hollow's children advanced neither in stature nor in comprehension. They remained fixed, reciting the same lessons with the same halting cadence. Spelling errors persisted across 20 years. Handwriting froze in an early, awkward hand. Their bodies and their minds, it seemed, occupied a threshold they could not cross. Accounts from surrounding villages confirm what the ledgers suggest. Farmers who passed the hollow at intervals reported seeing the same children year after year, unchanged in height, their faces carrying the peculiar smoothness of arrested youth. One traveler, recalling a visit in both 1837 and 1854, wrote that he was met at the road by a boy whose features were precisely as they had been 17 years earlier, his voice, his man. Near, his expression untouched by time. The villagers themselves did not dispute the anomaly, but accepted it with the silence of inevitability. Outsiders asked, "How old are the children now?" To which the answer was always vague, delivered with lowered eyes. "They are as they have always been." Within the hollow, the absence of growth was not explained but endured. The effect of such stasis was disquieting. To see the same group of children clustered about a doorway in 1832, and then again in 1852, unaltered in size or bearing, was to glimpse something that contradicted the most fundamental rhythms of life. Neighbors spoke of it as if it were a season that never shifted, like a frost that never melted, or a dusk that never gave way to morning. The records preserve only the clinical trace, unchanged names, unadvanced years, uncorrected errors. But between the lines there emerges a more haunting impression, the sense of a village in which childhood did not yield to adolescence, in which the calendar turned, but the bodies did not. Where other places marked life by growth, Ashwood Hollow remained suspended, its children locked in a tableau of perpetual youth, a silence deeper than death because it carried on without change. The church was not blind to Ashwood Hollow. Its children, suspended between birth and maturity, passed under clerical scrutiny again and again, though never with resolution. The baptismal registers, preserved in the diocesan archive, bear witness to the anomaly. Names inscribed in the early decades of the century, Thomas, Clara, Elias, Margaret, were entered once, yet their presence lingered across the decades with troubling constancy. The same children presented for catechism in the 1830s appeared again in the 1850s, their appearance unaltered. Clergy, bound to record with fidelity, did so, but unease seeped into the margins. In the baptismal roll of 1839, one priest added beside the name of Margaret Bellamy, "Unchanged, since first seen though much time has passed." In 1848, another annotation reads, "This child should by years be grown, yet remains in aspect unaltered." The phrasing is hesitant, as though the writer wished to acknowledge the fact, but feared the charge of superstition. Confirmation classes presented the clergy with particular difficulty. Children baptized in the 1830s were deemed ready for confirmation in the 1840s, yet when examined they displayed no greater comprehension than they had a decade earlier. Some could not recite beyond the simplest prayers, their voices small, their faces unchanged. The officiating ministers, confronted with what seemed a perpetual infancy, postponed the rite. Notes of delay recur throughout the records. Confirmation deferred, for want of readiness, written in 1842, then again beside the same names in 1853. Correspondence between rural clergy and diocesan officials reveals the quiet alarm of the church. Letters speak in guarded terms of a peculiar stagnation in the hollow of children who bear not the years appointed unto them. One clergyman confessed that he had grown uneasy officiating rites in the valley, fearing that to baptize or bless those who did not age might be to consecrate something not intended for holy ground. His superiors offered no counsel beyond the instruction to continue recording faithfully and avoid speculation. Yet speculation seeped in. Among the private diaries of Reverend Silas Moore, who visited Ashwood Hollow in 1851, lies a passage seldom cited. "These are not children, though they appear as such. They are as likenesses made permanent, as if carved in the flesh by a hand that forbids decay. They kneel, they answer, yet they do not grow. To stand before them is to stand before an unbroken echo." The ecclesiastical record thus bears both the imprint of ritual and the shadow of doubt. Baptisms, catechisms, confirmations, rites designed to mark progress, ion through life, were disrupted in Ashwood Hollow, their sequence fractured. The children resisted the calendar, and so the church, founded upon the rhythm of birth, growth, and death, found itself disoriented. It could record, but not resolve. What remains in the ledgers are not explanations but hesitations, marginalia of doubt, annotations of unease, the faint trace of men who wished to preserve order but could not. In Ashwood Hollow, the sacraments faltered, for the children who never grew left the church with nothing but silence, ink, and unanswered rites. In 1847, a physician from London was summoned at the insistence of a diocesan official who had grown uneasy with the Hollow's anomaly. The doctor, whose name is preserved only as J.H., undertook the journey with the precision of a man trained to dispel superstition through anatomy. His journals, later archived in fragments at the College of Surgeons, record the observations with clinical detachment, though the language betrays a creeping unease. The examination began with surface appearance. The children, he noted, presented a pallor unnatural to rural youth, with dermis of a translucency that permits vessels to appear in marked relief. Their skin was likened to thin parchment, stretched without vigor across fragile frames. Though some of the children had been present in parish records for 20 years or more, their aspect was consistently that of early adolescence. Slender limbs, smooth countenances, and eyes that retained the brightness of childhood without the progression of maturity. Skeletal palpation revealed further anomalies. The doctor recorded osseous brittleness disproportionate to stature, with bones that seemed fragile, resisting growth yet prone to fracture. He noted the absence of growth at epiphyseal plates, a finding that in modern terms would indicate premature closure, though here it occurred without the transition into adulthood. In his words, "The bones are as those of children arrested, held in form without advancement, yet weakened by the very suspension of nature." Reproductive development was likewise absent. The male subjects bore no deepening of voice, no enlargement of frame. The female subjects displayed no signs of maturation. "It is as though the body has denied them the passage into fecundity," the doctor wrote, leaving them permanent in the threshold state, neither advancing nor decaying. Mental condition was also observed. The children recited prayers and responded to inquiry, yet their comprehension did not surpass the lessons of their earliest schooling. Vocabulary limited, memory unprogressive, reasoning faculties held in abeyance, he concluded. Their minds, like their bodies, appeared arrested at the brink of growth, repeating themselves with the monotony of a broken mechanism. The final portion of the journal carries the weight of the physician's conclusion. His handwriting grows uneven, the lines marked with hesitation. These conditions cannot be ascribed to ordinary hereditary disease, nor to the known consequences of consanguinity alone. The anomaly is congenital, yet its persistence is unnatural. I find no precedent in my studies for bodies that maintain childhood across decades without degradation. The condition must be regarded as congenital, unnatural. The last page closes without recommendation. No treatment is prescribed, no course of intervention proposed. The journal ends abruptly, as if the act of recording had been sufficient, or perhaps too much. The physician returned to London. The hollow remained unchanged. The case notes, quietly filed among other curiosities, were seldom cited thereafter. Thus the examination achieved what the Church and the census had not, a clinical vocabulary for the impossible. Yet, even in the measured hand of science, the children of Ashwood Hollow remained inexplicable. Figures of perpetual youth whose very existence strained the limits of medicine and faith alike. In the parish grounds surrounding Ashwood Hollow, the graves told a partial story. The stones that remain, many now worn beyond legibility, belong to adults only, fathers, mothers, elders, and the occasional traveler whose life ended within the valley. Nowhere in the surviving records does one find the burial of a child from the hollow during the decades in question. Between 1832 and 1860, while 12 names persisted in the census as perpetual children, not a single corresponding interment was recorded in the churchyard soil. This absence drew comment from neighboring parishes. Rural England was accustomed to the small graves of childhood mortality. Epidemics, accidents, and hunger claimed the young with grim regularity. Yet in Ashwood Hollow, no such evidence appeared. When questioned, the villagers offered evasions. The children were well, the children were safe, the children were as they have always been. Such replies, repeated in testimony to visiting clerics, deepened the suspicion that ordinary rites of burial had been withheld. Rumors soon circulated of concealment. A farmer from a neighboring hamlet recalled hearing, while passing at dusk, the muted sound of weeping beneath the floorboards of one hollow cottage. Another, years later, described a villager whispering after drink that the children do not lie in earth, for the earth will not take them. Oral accounts such as these, preserved in diocesan correspondence, were never substantiated, yet they gathered force in repetition. By mid-century, whispers of cellars had taken hold. Travelers reported shuttered houses where no smoke rose from chimneys, yet faint lamplight flickered through slats at night. Some claimed to have seen small figures move in basements, their outlawers blurred by candle glow through cracks in the wooden boards. Others spoke of the odor of mildew and something sharper, decay that lingered though no graves were present above ground. An 1856 diocesan inquiry noted with restraint, "We observed no burials of children within the hollow across the past 2 decades. Inquiry with parishioners was unproductive. There persists in local speech the notion that certain bodies are kept within dwellings, not consigned to ground. This remains unproven." The inquiry was closed without action, its conclusion marked only by the phrase nihil probatur, nothing proved. Yet the archival silence conceals unease. The refusal of burial disrupts not only the expectations of community, but the rhythm of faith itself. To withhold the body from earth is to break covenant with both soil and sacrament. In Ashwood Hollow, the absence of child graves suggests either a deathless permanence or a concealment too profound to admit. Neither explanation lies easily within the records. What endures is a claustrophobic impression: cottages with doors closed, cellars sealed, children unseen, and no markers in the churchyard to testify to their passing. The hollow resisted the ground, and in that resistance bred a deeper suspicion that beneath the wooden floors, in dark and airless spaces, the secret of the children was hidden, preserved away from both earth and witness. The official ledgers of Ashwood Hollow remain spare, yet the oral accounts that survived in neighboring villages tell of a more unsettling reality. Farmers, wayfarers, and parish visitors spoke in low tones of what they had witnessed, or believed they had witnessed, when passing through the hollow. These testimonies, gathered in fragments across the 19th century, cannot be verified by record, yet their consistency across time and distance gives them a weight that cannot be ignored. One farmer from the parish of Witheridge, writing in 1841, described pausing on the hollow's edge while driving cattle. As dusk settled, he claimed to hear the sound of children at play, shrill laughter, the cadence of skipping rhymes, though no children were visible in the lanes or fields. He continued along the path, unsettled, only to hear the same voices behind him, echoing faintly until they dissolved into the fog. In his account, he added, almost as an afterthought, "I saw the same children 20 years later, still at the window, no taller, no older." Another account, preserved in the diary of a traveling schoolmaster in 1852, reports an encounter at the hollow's single well. The master wrote that he saw a cluster of children standing in silence, their eyes fixed upon him. Recognizing one girl he had glimpsed during a prior visit in 1836, he greeted her. She gave no reply but blinked slowly, as though the act of recognition itself had been a burden. In his notes, he remarked, "It is not that they appear young, it is that they appear precisely the same, as if memory itself had been etched upon their features." Testimonies of sound were most frequent. A blacksmith's widow, passing through in 1849, told of hearing a soft chorus rising from the cottages at midnight, voices high and faint, as though a hymn were being sung in faltering unison. Yet when she paused to listen, the words blurred into indistinct murmurs, neither prayer nor song, but something caught between. Others spoke of movement at windows long after lamps had been extinguished. A constable who visited the hollow in 1857 on parish business wrote that he observed, in one cottage, 3 children peering from a shutter. He noted that they withdrew the moment his eyes met theirs, yet when he returned the following evening, the same faces appeared in the same place, unchanged. "It was," he wrote, "as though the house contained an image, not a child, fixed in its likeness and shown only when watched." These testimonies cannot be proven. They are the artifacts of memory, vulnerable to distortion, said from mouth to mouth and inked only in private diaries or scattered correspondence. Yet their persistence across decades suggests something more than invention. The hollow's silence, so unyielding in the records, was punctured by these fleeting glimpses, voices without bodies, faces without years, children who watched but did not change. In the end, the testimonies stand as folklore, yet folklore that carries the cadence of dread. They belong neither to fact nor to fiction, but to the unease that lingers when silence is too complete, and when faces remain pressed against glass long after time has moved elsewhere. The census of 1859 brought Ashwood Hollow once more under official scrutiny. The enumerator assigned was Henry Cawthorne, a clerk of modest standing in the parish office at Exeter. His hand survives in the register, neat, precise, each stroke measured, betraying the discipline of a man trained in administration rather than interpretation. Yet within his entries for Ashwood Hollow, one finds a fissure in that composure, a subtle unraveling that culminated in his own disappearance only weeks after the survey. The names recorded in 1832 and again in 1841 and 1851 appeared once more in 1859, unchanged in order, unchanged in description. 12 children, still marked between 8 and 12 years of age, stood listed as though untouched by nearly 3 decades. The parents had altered, some crossed through, others replaced by widowed spouses. Yet the children remained immovable, frozen in the bureaucratic arithmetic of the ledger. Cawthorne entered them with the diligence of his office, but his marginal annotations betray the intrusion of something more. Beside the column of ages, he wrote in a smaller hand, "No alteration since previous." Later, at the bottom of the page, another line appears, written with greater force, the ink pressed into the fibers of the page. "These are not the years of men, but of ash and shadow." Such a phrase is wholly at odds with the dry uniformity of census practice. It suggests a moment of recognition that the enumerator, faced with the impossibility of the entries, found himself unable to proceed within the confines of mere administration. His official duty collapsed into personal terror, recorded not in confession, but in the formal script of his work. Weeks later, Parish correspondence notes that Cawthorne failed to report for duty. His possessions were found in his Exeter lodgings, the census book already delivered. He himself had vanished. A single memorandum in the diocesan archive records his fate with brevity. Cawthorne, missing, believed drowned, body not recovered. The absence of a corpse left speculation unchecked. Some whispered he had returned to Ashwood Hollow. Others suggested his mind had broken beneath the weight of what he had seen, and he had taken himself to the river. What remains indisputable is the page itself, still preserved in the 1859 register. The children's names, identical to those of 3 decades before. The ages, unadvanced. And the marginal note pressed in ink as though carved into the fibers. Not the years of men, but of ash and shadow. It is a phrase that carries no official weight, yet it lingers more powerfully than the formal entries it accompanies. The census sought to measure and contain, to assign order to households and ages. In Ashwood Hollow, that order dissolved, leaving behind a record that is both ledger and epitaph, the final trace of a man who recorded what should not exist and who vanished thereafter. The anomaly of Ashwood Hollow, though seldom discussed openly in ecclesiastical circles, did not entirely escape the attention of Victorian science. The mid-19th century was an era in which heredity, once a matter of biblical lineage or rural gossip, began to assume the framework of empirical inquiry. Into this atmosphere drifted whispers of a valley where children did not age. The phenomenon never reached the platform of public lecture or published monograph. Yet it persisted in correspondence, case notes, and speculative essays that reveal more about the anxieties of the age than about the hollow itself. Physicians trained in the early theories of atavism speculated that the children represented a form of arrested development, a reversion to an ancestral state of immaturity. Atavism, long invoked to explain congenital malformations and criminal tendencies, was here applied to the very rhythm of growth. The Hollow's children were described as held in a primitive likeness, their bodies resisting the progress of maturation as though bound to an early stage of man's descent. This interpretation suggested that their perpetual childhood was not supernatural, but biological, a grotesque return to origins. Others turned to the subject of consanguinity. The mid-century saw renewed interest in the effects of inbreeding, spurred by both pastoral observation and the emerging work of naturalists. Physicians argued that repeated intermarriage within the Hollow's 3 families had produced a state of blood stagnation, in which vitality failed to transmit properly from one generation to the next. The result, they suggested, was a kind of hereditary paralysis, organs unformed, bones weakened, reproductive systems silenced. Arrested growth in this view was the inevitable price of genealogical confinement, yet such explanations carried discomfort. Most accounts of inbred deformity involve degeneration, hunchbacks, lunacy, sterility, not the eerie stillness of perpetual youth. Victorian medicine had little language for stasis. Disease was measured in decline, not suspension. To imagine a body fixed between stages strained the conceptual frameworks of the time. Thus, speculation often drifted into metaphor. Blood described as a pool without current. Growth, likened to a clock whose pendulum had ceased mid-swing. A few scholars, influenced by early heredity studies in France and Germany, suggested that the Hollow might represent an extreme example of hereditary arrest. They pointed to experimental breeding in plants and animals, where certain traits failed to advance across generations. If growth could be suppressed in livestock, perhaps the same might occur in men. But the analogy faltered. Plants did not speak, nor did cattle linger with unchanged faces across decades. The literature never reached consensus. Ashwood Hollow remained a medical rumor, a case whispered in lectures and appended to correspondence, invoked as an extreme but unverified instance of hereditary stagnation. Its children became a cipher upon which theories of atavism, incest, and heredity were projected, each explanation provisional, each leaving unease unresolved. In retrospect, these writings reveal not answers, but a historical mood. Victorian science sought to master anomaly with taxonomy and theory. Yet in the case of Ashwood Hollow, the theories themselves sound less like resolutions than like fragile structures erected over a void, the rational scaffolding of an age unsettled by what it could not fully name. When investigators returned to Ashwood Hollow in 1872, they found a village unmoored from the ordinary rhythm of life. The inspector's report, filed under the jurisdiction of Devonshire, but quietly archived rather than circulated, describes a place abandoned without ceremony, a settlement where absence spoke more loudly than presence. The approach revealed no smoke from chimneys, no sound of livestock, no sign of traffic upon the rutted cart road. Entering the hamlet, the officials noted that doors stood ajar yet not broken, as though left hastily, but not in panic. Within the cottages, the air was stale, the scent of mildew heavy, and yet possessions remained in place. Tables were set with crockery, meals half consumed or long since spoiled. In one dwelling, bread lay upon the hearth, hardened but intact, its knife left in place upon the board. Another contained garments folded neatly across a chair, as though awaiting a return that never occurred. The absence of adults was complete. Beds bore the impression of long disuse. Chairs were cold to the touch, hearths extinguished. And yet, upon the floors, the officials observed tracks, small footprints pressed into the dust, as if children had walked back and forth within the cottages after the departure of their elders. In the mud outside, similar impressions led from door to door, clustering at thresholds before vanishing into the lanes. No larger prints accompanied them. The inspector's account is measured but edged with unease. It appears, he wrote, that the village has been deserted by its grown inhabitants, though signs persist of children having lingered thereafter. Their fate is unknown. No bodies were recovered, no signs of struggle or epidemic discovered. Livestock, where present, had starved in pens. Wells remained full, tools lay unused, gardens overgrown. The settlement had not been destroyed but simply relinquished. Attempts to trace the former residents yielded little. Parish registers ceased to update after 1870. Baptisms, marriages, and burials stopped without remark. Neighboring villages reported no influx of Hollow families, no wandering survivors seeking shelter. It was as if the entire adult population had dissolved into silence, leaving behind only the trace of children who themselves did not remain. The report, compiled with bureaucratic restraint, concludes without explanation. Circumstances peculiar. Recommend site be marked abandoned. No further action required. Yet the language betrays a hesitation. Descriptions linger on the unfinished meals, the footprints in mud, the quiet suggestion of presence after absence. The inspectors, men accustomed to inventory and fact, found themselves recording impressions that hinted at something beyond dereliction. In the decades since, the Hollow has remained uninhabited, its cottages collapsing into the soil, its cart road reclaimed by roots and moss. Only the inspector's report preserves the moment of discovery, the eerie tableau of a village departed in silence, possessions intact, footprints without bodies, and an emptiness more disturbing than violence. The final investigation into Ashwood Hollow, conducted in the winter of 1873, revealed what the census, the church, and rumor had only suggested. Beneath two cottages at the center of the hamlet, hidden trapdoors led into narrow cellars, their entrances concealed beneath warped boards and layers of dust. The inspectors, prying these open, descended into chambers where the air was thick and stagnant, heavy with the odor of mold and something sharper that did not dissipate. What they found was entered into the record with the restraint of men writing against the weight of horror. In the first cellar lay a row of 6 narrow beds, each draped in threadbare linen. Upon them rested small figures, their bodies shriveled yet not decomposed. The forms bore the unmistakable outlines of children, but their flesh, darkened and taut, clung too closely to bone, as though dried rather than rotted. Their eyes were sealed, their mouths closed, their hair brittle but intact. The report notes that garments still clung to the bodies, simple smocks, stockings, and shoes, preserved beyond what natural decay would allow. In the second cellar, the tableau repeated itself. 6 more figures lay arranged in an almost identical fashion, as though placed with deliberation. None bore signs of burial rites, no shrouds, no crosses, no soil. They had been laid out, as if still within the household, preserved in secrecy rather than consigned to earth. It is the appearance, the inspector wrote, of children put to bed and never risen. The investigators recorded their findings with clinical precision. Measurements were taken, each body no taller than 4 feet, no heavier than 50 pounds. Notes emphasize the absence of decay, no odor of putrefaction, no evidence of vermin or disturbance. The limbs were rigid, but the skin, though desiccated, remained intact. The report concludes, specimens present an unnatural preservation, resisting ordinary processes of corruption, cause undetermined. No adult remains were discovered, nor any sign of how the bodies had been maintained in such a condition. There was no apparatus, no preservative liquid, no lime or resin. Only the stagnant air of the cellar, the rotting beams above, and the strange persistence of the forms below. Testimony appended to the report records the reactions of those present. One constable refused to return after the first descent, stating that the silence of the cellar pressed upon the lungs. Another remarked that the figures seemed less like corpses than effigies, likenesses held in suspension, waiting. These impressions, though unofficial, echo the unease that pervades the formal account. The official inquiry closed without conclusion. The bodies were not interred in consecrated ground but removed quietly. 2 transported to London for examination, the remainder left unrecorded. The cottages were sealed, their trapdoors nailed shut. Ashwood Hollow, already abandoned, was marked upon parish maps as deserted and thereafter left to ruin. Thus, the final discovery confirmed the whispers. Children unseen in graveyards had not vanished, but lingered in darkness beneath the homes of the hollow. Preserved without explanation, they lay in ordered rows, the still occupants of a silence too deep for burial. Among the few surviving personal documents from Ashwood Hollow, the diary of Reverend Nathaniel Hale remains the most troubling. Preserved in fragments within the diocesan archive, its pages were never intended for publication. Written in a small, hurried hand, the entries oscillate between observation and confession, as though Hale himself could not determine whether he was recording fact or warding off terror. The diary begins in 1851, shortly after his appointment to the rural circuit. At first, the entries are conventional, remarks upon the remoteness of the valley, the poverty of its families, the strangeness of their reserve. Yet by 1853, a change appears. His lines shorten, his tone sharpens. He begins to note silences in the cottages, children who stare without blinking, households where prayers are recited but never completed. One passage, dated March 2nd, 1853, reads, "The children are as when I first came. Their faces bear no alteration, their stature no increase. They kneel before me, yet they do not seem to grow. It is as though I serve not the living, but images." From this point onward, the entries carry the marks of strain. Hale writes of prolonged silences that fell during visits, intervals where he heard neither speech nor motion, only a stillness that seemed to deepen as he remained within the room. He records that on several occasions, while praying aloud, his voice echoed faintly, though the chamber was too small to return sound. The most infamous entry appears in October of 1854. Hale writes, "While walking past the cottages at night, I heard a chorus of voices, low but clear, as of children speaking in one accord. The words, though whispered, struck with force. 'We are not meant to grow.' I froze, for it was not the sound of play but of confession. When I entered the lane, the voices ceased and the windows were dark. Yet the phrase has not left me." Subsequent pages reveal his decline. He describes restless nights, plagued by dreams of children circling his bed, their lips moving without sound. His handwriting grows increasingly erratic, entries trailing into half-finished lines. "They watch," or "not to grow, not to die." Margins are filled with repetitions of the same words, written over and over until the ink bleeds through. By 1856, the diary becomes fragmentary. Hale remarks that he can no longer preach with conviction, that the sacraments feel mocked by unchanging faces. He pleads for reassignment, though no official record confirms his removal. The diary ends abruptly in mid-sentence. "If they remain as children, then I—" The page is torn, the remainder lost. The archival presentation of Hale's diary, bound decades later, includes a brief note by the curator. The Reverend withdrew from public ministry, final residence unknown. No burial record survives. What remains, then, is not an explanation but a testament of collapse. In Hale's words, we glimpse the shift from observation to paranoia, from ritual to dread. His diary does not solve the mystery of Ashwood Hollow, but it preserves the echo of a whispered phrase, "We are not meant to grow," and the silence that consumed the man who heard it. Of the 12 preserved figures recovered from the cellars of Ashwood Hollow in 1873, 2 were transported to London for examination under the authority of the College of Surgeons. The remains, assigned the catalogue numbers specimen 1173A and 1173B, were received in sealed crates and documented by the Committee on Pathological Curiosities. The subsequent report, circulated only in restricted form, remains one of the few clinical accounts of the Hollow's children. The specimens were described as juvenile in appearance, each measuring approximately 4 feet in length. External observation confirmed the peculiar state of preservation noted at the site. Integument dry and contracted, yet retaining structural integrity. Hair remained in place, nails were visible, and eyes intact. There was no evidence of conventional embalming, no application of resin, pitch, or mineral preservative. Dissection proceeded under controlled conditions. The thoracic and abdominal cavities revealed organs markedly reduced in size and weight. The heart was undersized, the lungs compressed, the viscera atrophic. In both specimens, the reproductive organs were rudimentary, arrested at a prepubescent state. No signs of disease or trauma were noted. Rather, the impression conveyed was one of systemic incompletion, as though the body had been suspended before maturation could commence. The most significant findings concerned the skeletal system. Examination of the long bones demonstrated a complete absence of epiphyseal plates. In ordinary juveniles, these cartilaginous zones remain open, permitting continued growth until closure in late adolescence. Here, the plates were absent altogether, the bone terminating in fused ends that bore no trace of developmental activity. The effect was paradoxical. The bodies presented the stature of children, yet the skeletal maturity of adulthood, an ossification without growth. Cranial study revealed no deformity beyond mild asymmetry of the sutures. Dentition was mixed, with both deciduous and permanent teeth present in incongruous arrangement. One mandible retained a milk tooth beside a fully formed molar, a juxtaposition described in the report as incompatible with ordinary chronology. The committee's conclusion, while framed in clinical vocabulary, betrays uncertainty. The remains represent an anomaly inconsistent with known developmental pathology. Arrested maturity is indicated, yet ossification exceeds expected limits. The specimens cannot be reconciled with existing categories of disease. A final remark, appended in smaller hand, reads simply, "Congenital, unnatural." Following examination, the specimens were sealed in glass jars with preservative solution and added to the restricted collection. Their catalog numbers appear in subsequent inventories, though with the annotation "classified." No display. At some point in the early 20th century, both entries were struck through in red ink. Their present location is unrecorded. Thus, the medical record, though precise, resolves nothing. The dissected bodies of Ashwood Hollow confirmed the anomaly but explain neither its origin nor its persistence. Bones that refused to grow, organs that never ripened, children whose appearance denied chronology. These were catalogued, measured, and stored away, filed into silence like the valley itself. Though Ashwood Hollow was officially declared deserted in 1873, accounts of its persistence continued to surface well into the late 19th and early 20th centuries. These were not found in parish ledgers or government registers, but in the scattered notations of wanderers, folklorists, and amateur antiquarians who ventured into the overgrown valley. Their writings, though anecdotal and unverifiable, form a curious appendix to the more clinical record, suggesting that absence did not extinguish presence. The most consistent element in these reports is the recurrence of figures at the windows of ruined cottages. In 1884, a surveyor mapping boundary lines noted pale faces peering from shattered panes as he crossed the valley at dusk. He assumed the village had been resettled until closer inspection revealed collapsed roofs, doors unhinged, and no evidence of occupation. His note concludes, faces identical to children described in earlier registers, not altered by time. In 1897, a folklorist named Henry Swithin included Ashwood Hollow in a pamphlet on English Villages of Strange Report. He wrote that travelers spoke of children still at play upon the lane, yet fading when approached as though painted in air. Swithin, skeptical of the supernatural, suggested these were hallucinations induced by fog and solitude. Yet he acknowledged the peculiarity that descriptions of theirs, children remained constant, small in stature, fair in countenance, dressed in garments of mid-century cut, their expressions blank, Accounts continued into the new century. A shepherd passing near the site in 1906 reported that he heard voices reciting a rhyme, faint but rhythmic, without source. On turning toward the sound, he observed 3 figures standing in a row within the frame of a collapsed cottage, their outlines blurred by distance. When he approached, the figures vanished, leaving only the structure's empty shell. His statement, recorded by a local antiquarian society, describes them as the same children my grandfather spoke of, unchanged these many years. The folkloric record is haunted by this theme of sameness. Whether seen in 1832 or 1906, the children appear identical, their faces smooth, their height unaltered, their gaze fixed. They are not described as spectral in the sense of translucence or glow, but rather as solid, ordinary, even corporeal, until they dissolve. This paradox gave rise to the phrase, repeated in regional folklore, that Ashwood Hollow was home to the children who would not grow and would not leave. Scholars who cataloged these testimonies in the mid-20th century dismissed them as rural legend, aligning them with tales of phantom monks or headless riders. Yet the archival context complicates dismissal. Unlike other apparitions, the Hollow's children had a documented prelude: census anomalies, parish doubts, medical reports, anatomical specimens. The folklore emerges not from invention, but from the residue of fact. Thus, the echoes of the Hollow cannot be separated from its history. Whether hallucination, legend, or lingering reality, the figures seen at shattered windows belong to a continuum of record and rumor. They remain the visible reminder of a valley where time once faltered, and where children appeared to linger, unchanged, long after the village itself had passed into ruin. The story of Ashwood Hollow closes not with explanation, but with silence. Its records, scattered across parish registers, diocesan correspondence, and medical inventories, form a fragmented archive whose pieces never wholly converge. Each document, census lists repeating the same children, baptismal rolls annotated with unease, the physician's report labeling them congenital, unnatural, the inspector's notes on deserted cottages, stands intact in its own domain. Yet together they describe a settlement that defied the sequence of life. The hollow itself has long since dissolved into ruin. Cottages collapsed under ivy, lanes reclaimed by roots, church timbers sunk into the soil. No families returned, no new settlement arose. Maps marked it abandoned, then omitted it altogether. Today its presence lingers only in the margins of archives, a footnote to more conventional histories of parish and county. What persists are sealed files. The anatomical specimens catalogued at the College of Surgeons, 1173A and 1173B, vanished from display, but remain listed in restricted inventories until the early 20th century, after which they disappear. Parish authorities retained the census ledgers, but inquiries into the anomaly ceased. By the late Victorian era, Ashwood Hollow was spoken of only in whispers, its name absent from official discourse yet alive in local legend. Attempts to revisit the case have met only absence. The Hollow site offers no remains beyond stone foundations and weathered markers for adults long buried. The children, whether preserved, interred, or vanished, leave no trace beyond the documents that once struggled to describe them. The archival record is at once abundant and barren, abundant in detail, barren in resolution. It is this absence of conclusion that forms the Hollow's enduring legacy. Unlike epidemics, crimes, or disasters, it offers no closure, no bodies counted, no cause named, no verdict reached. Its children remain revere at the threshold, neither living nor fully dead, fixed in ink and rumor. Each generation of record keepers, census clerks, priests, physicians, inspectors, attempted to contain the anomaly within their respective frameworks, yet all faltered, leaving annotations that betray unease more than authority. Unchanged since first seen, not the years of men, but of ash and shadow, congenital, unnatural. The Hollow thus survives less as a place than as a case. It is preserved in fragments of handwriting, in catalog numbers crossed through, in diaries half finished. Its presence is felt not in continuity, but in interruption, moments where ordinary record faltered, where the pen slipped into doubt. In this lies the macabre legacy of Ashwood Hollow, a reminder that even within the structures of census, sacrament, and science, there remain spaces that resist explanation. Its children, unaging and unmourned, endure as figures of archival silence. They are remembered not through stone, nor through memory, but through the very absence of resolution, a mystery left suspended, like the valley itself, in a silence that has never been broken. Ashwood Hollow remains silent, its children frozen in time, watching from the fog. If their story unsettled you, tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Subscribe and return tomorrow when another page of the ledger is opened and another forgotten horror is laid bare.